Before we begin, I want you to think about something for a moment. Have you ever spent years loving someone who never seemed to notice? Have you ever shown up day after day, given your time, your energy, and your heart, only to wonder if any of it truly mattered? If you have, then today's story is for you. And if you believe that the strongest acts of love are often the quiet ones, the ones nobody applauds, the ones nobody posts about, the ones that happen behind closed doors, then make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Because the story you're about to hear isn't about drama. It isn't about betrayal. It isn't about shocking twists. It's about patience. It's about sacrifice. And it's about what happens when years of silent love finally find their voice. In the peaceful suburbs of Austin, Texas, where summer evenings stretched endlessly beneath golden skies and the sound of cicadas echoed through quiet neighborhoods, lived a woman named Sarah Collins. To most people, Sarah's life looked almost perfect. She was 42 years old. She had a stable career, a loving husband, a comfortable home, a routine that seemed calm and predictable. But appearances can be deceiving, because behind Sarah's warm smile existed a kind of exhaustion that very few people understood. Not physical exhaustion, not the kind that disappears after a good night's sleep. This was emotional exhaustion, the kind that slowly accumulates when you spend years carrying the worries, fears, and pain of other people. Sarah worked as a pediatric nurse at Austin Children's Hospital. Every day she cared for children facing battles most adults would struggle to endure. She comforted frightened families. She held tiny hands during painful procedures. She stayed beside hospital beds long after her shifts officially ended. Her coworkers often wondered how she managed it, how she remained patient, how she stayed kind, how she continued giving so much of herself year after year. The truth was simple. Sarah believed something deeply. Children should never face fear alone. Even when medicine couldn't solve every problem, compassion still mattered. Presence still mattered. Love still mattered. And because of that belief, she gave everything she had, day after day, month after month, year after year. Parents trusted her. Doctors respected her. Children felt safe around her. But every act of kindness carried a cost. Each heartbreaking diagnosis, each worried parent, each difficult goodbye. Sarah carried those moments with her long after she left the hospital. Yet, despite the emotional weight, she never stopped showing up. Because helping others wasn't simply her job, it was part of who she was. After work, Sarah returned home to another important role. She was a wife. Years earlier, she had met her husband Mark during a hospital charity fundraiser. Unlike many people she had met before, Mark wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy. He didn't dominate conversations. Instead, he listened. He paid attention. And there was something comforting about that, something genuine. As their relationship grew, Sarah realized that Mark possessed a quiet strength that was increasingly rare. He was dependable, honest, grounded, the kind of person who made promises carefully because he intended to keep them. But Mark's life came with complications: a previous marriage, a difficult divorce, and a son named Ethan. From the beginning, Mark never tried to hide that reality. In fact, during one of their earliest dates, he looked directly at Sarah and told her something important. "My son will always come first." There was no apology in his voice, no hesitation, just honesty. Sarah smiled. "I wouldn't expect anything less." At the time, the conversation seemed simple, but years later, she would realize how important that moment truly was. Because accepting Mark meant accepting Ethan as well, even though she had no idea how difficult that journey would become. Ethan was 12 years old when Sarah officially became part of his daily life. 12 is a complicated age. Old enough to remember every disappointment. Young enough to still be deeply affected by them. The divorce had hurt him, maybe more than anyone realized. And over time, he had built walls around himself. Invisible walls. The kind designed to keep pain out. Unfortunately, those walls also kept people out, including Sarah. From the moment she moved into the house, Ethan remained polite but distant. He wasn't rude, he wasn't disrespectful, but he wasn't welcoming either. Most conversations ended after a few words. Yeah, no, fine, maybe. That was usually all she got. At dinner, he focused on his plate. At home, he spent most of his time in his room. His headphones often served as a barrier between himself and the rest of the world. Sarah noticed everything, not because she was trying to force a relationship, because caring was simply part of her nature. Yet every attempt to connect seemed to disappear into silence. Sometimes she wondered if she was making any progress at all. Late at night, lying beside Mark, she would quietly admit her fears. I don't think he'll ever accept me. Mark would squeeze her hand. He notices more than you think. I don't know. He does, Mark would say. He just doesn't know how to show it. Sarah wanted to believe him, but believing became harder as the years passed. Still, she never gave up. She never tried to replace Ethan's mother. She never demanded affection, never pushed him into uncomfortable conversations. Instead, she chose something much harder: consistency. She showed up, again and again. She attended soccer games. She sat through school events. She helped with homework. She stayed awake late helping him finish projects when frustration made him want to quit. She learned the little details most people overlooked: which foods he liked, which foods he hated, his favorite snacks, his favorite movies, the music he listened to when he thought nobody was paying attention. She remembered birthdays, tests, important games, small victories, and disappointing losses. Not because she expected appreciation, because she cared. Years passed this way, slowly, quietly, patiently. Then something unexpected began to happen. Tiny cracks started appearing in Ethan's emotional walls. One evening, Sarah was baking cookies when Ethan wandered into the kitchen. He stood there silently for several moments, watching. Finally, he asked a question. Why do you work so much? Sarah looked up, then smiled. Because some kids don't get to go home at night. Ethan remained silent, so somebody has to stay with them. He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either, and for Sarah, that mattered. Days later, he asked another question, then another. Small conversations started appearing where silence used to live. At a soccer game, after scoring a goal, Ethan glanced toward the stands, toward Sarah, then nodded. Just once. A tiny gesture, one that most people would never notice. But Sarah noticed, because after years of distance, even the smallest acknowledgement felt meaningful. For the first time, she began to believe that maybe Mark was right. Maybe Ethan had been paying attention all along. Maybe healing simply required time. Unfortunately, while things slowly improved at home, life at the hospital was becoming harder than ever. Sarah continued carrying enormous emotional burdens: long shifts, emergency cases, heartbroken families, sleepless nights, and despite her strength, she was becoming tired. Very tired. Some evenings, she sat alone in her car after work, hands gripping the steering wheel, unable to gather enough energy to walk inside. Not because she didn't love her family, but because she had spent the entire day giving pieces of herself away. Yet every morning she got up and did it all again, because that was who she was: someone who showed up, someone who stayed, someone who loved even when it wasn't easy. Then December arrived, the busiest season of the year. The hospital became overcrowded. Flu cases surged. Staff shortages created endless pressure. Children spent Christmas in hospital rooms instead of at home. And Sarah pushed herself harder than ever. Day after day, shift after shift, giving everything she had left, never realizing that the moment which would change everything was already approaching. A moment that would finally answer a question she had carried in her heart for years. Did Ethan truly see her? And the answer was closer than she ever imagined. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling exhausted. Not the kind of tiredness that comes from missing a few hours of sleep. This was deeper than that. The kind of exhaustion that settles into your heart after years of carrying responsibilities that never seem to end. She got ready for work in silence. Mark had already left. Ethan was still asleep. The house was quiet. For a moment, Sarah stood in the kitchen holding her coffee and stared out the window. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Christmas decorations covered nearby homes. Families were preparing for the holidays, but Sarah felt disconnected from all of it because while everyone else seemed excited for the season, the hospital was entering its most difficult time of the year. By the time she arrived at Austin Children's Hospital, the waiting rooms were already crowded. Parents looked worried. Children looked exhausted. Doctors and nurses moved quickly through the hallways. Another difficult day had begun. Hours passed, then more hours. Sarah barely had time to sit down. She comforted frightened children, answered endless questions, supported anxious parents, and somehow continued smiling through all of it. But inside, she was running on empty. That evening, a young patient she had cared for several months suffered a sudden setback. The situation became critical. Doctors rushed into the room, machines beeped loudly, family members cried. Sarah remained professional, calm, focused, exactly as she always did. Yet when her shift finally ended, she felt something inside her break. Not dramatically, not visibly, just quietly, like a thread stretched too far. For the first time in years, she questioned herself. Did any of this matter? Did anyone notice? Did anyone understand how much she was giving? She sat alone in her car for nearly 20 minutes before starting the engine. The parking lot slowly emptied around her. Snowflakes drifted through the cold evening air. And for the first time in a very long time, Sarah cried. Not because she was weak, because she was human. Eventually, she wiped away her tears and drove home. The house appeared dark except for a single light glowing from the kitchen. She stepped inside, placed her keys on the counter, and immediately noticed something unusual. A folded piece of paper. Her name was written across the front. Sarah frowned. Slowly, she picked it up, opened it, and read the words inside. Thank you for always showing up. That was it. One sentence. Nothing more. Yet the moment she saw the handwriting, she knew exactly who had written it. Ethan. For several seconds, she simply stared at the paper, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to believe it. Because after all these years, he had noticed. Every soccer game, every late-night project, every difficult conversation, every moment she chose patience instead of frustration. He had seen it all. Sarah carefully folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. Then she sat at the kitchen table and cried again. This time for an entirely different reason. Not because she felt invisible, but because she finally realized she wasn't. The following weeks passed quietly. Christmas grew closer. The atmosphere at home felt different. Not dramatically different, just warmer, softer, as though something important had shifted beneath the surface. One evening, while Sarah washed dishes, Ethan entered the kitchen. Working Christmas? He asked. Sarah nodded. Half the day. That sucks. She laughed. It comes with the job. Ethan stood silently for a moment, then shrugged. The kids are lucky you're there. Sarah froze. What? The hospital kids. He looked away awkwardly. If I was scared, I'd probably want someone like you around. Then he walked away before she could respond. Sarah stood motionless. Those few words meant more to her than Ethan could ever understand, because for years she had wondered if he respected her. Now she knew. Christmas Day finally arrived. Sarah completed her morning shift before driving home. The hospital had been emotional. Some children were improving. Others were facing uncertain futures. As always, Sarah gave everything she had. When she pulled into the driveway that evening, she expected a quiet night with Mark and Ethan. Instead, she found several cars parked outside the house. Confused, she walked to the front door. Laughter echoed from inside. Sarah opened the door and stopped. The living room was full. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, several families whose children she had cared for over the years. Everyone turned toward her, then smiled. What is this? Sarah asked. Mark stepped forward. A surprise. Sarah looked around the room in complete confusion. Then she noticed Ethan standing near the Christmas tree. He looked nervous. Very nervous. The room slowly became silent. Ethan cleared his throat. I don't really like speeches. A few people laughed, including Sarah. But there's something I've wanted to say. His eyes found hers. When Dad married Sarah, I wasn't happy. The room remained quiet. I didn't want another parent. He swallowed hard. I thought if I cared about her, I'd get hurt again. Sarah felt tears beginning to form. So I kept my distance. Ethan paused, but she never gave up. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room was completely focused on him. She came to every game. His voice grew stronger. Every school event. Every bad day. Every good day. Every time I pushed her away. Sarah could no longer stop crying. Ethan continued. I spent years pretending not to notice. Then he smiled. But I noticed everything. The room remained silent. I noticed the rides, the homework help, the encouragement, the way she remembered things nobody else remembered. His voice cracked slightly. And I noticed that no matter how difficult I made things, he looked directly at Sarah. She stayed. Sarah covered her mouth. Ethan took a deep breath, then finally said the words she had waited years to hear. You never tried to replace my mom. The room was completely silent. You just became someone I could trust. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. And honestly, he smiled. I couldn't have asked for a better stepmom. The room erupted into applause. Sarah couldn't hold back anymore. Years of doubt, years of patience, years of wondering whether any of her efforts mattered. All disappeared in that single moment. Ethan walked toward her, then hugged her. Not a quick hug, not a polite hug. A real hug. The kind that says everything words cannot. Sarah wrapped her arms around him and cried openly. Not because she was sad, because she was finally at peace. For years she had been planting seeds of love without knowing whether anything would grow. Now she had her answer. The seeds had grown. And they had become something beautiful. Family. As the evening continued, stories filled the room. Laughter echoed through the house. And for the first time in a very long time, Sarah felt lighter, because she finally understood something important. Love is rarely measured in dramatic moments. It is measured in consistency, in patience, in showing up when nobody notices, in staying when it would be easier to leave. Years later, when Ethan graduated, he searched through the crowd and proudly stood beside both Mark and Sarah. And in that moment, Sarah realized something she would carry forever. The strongest families are not always built by blood. Sometimes they are built by choice, by patience, by sacrifice, and by years of quiet love that refuses to give up. Because real love never asks, what do I get in return? Real love simply shows up, again and again and again, until one day, when you least expect it, someone finally looks at you and says the words you've been waiting years to hear. Thank you for always showing up. And for Sarah Collins, those words changed everything.